If you look across the violent span of human history, literally millions of people have marched into battle. But what exactly separates your ordinary, run-of-the-mill soldier from an absolute historical legend? Well, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to break down the anatomy of warfare's absolute apex predators. From the ancient world all the way to modern black operations, we are dissecting the 21 most lethal military units to ever walk, ride, or parachute onto a battlefield. So let's just dive right into this and uncover what it truly takes to forge the ultimate warrior.
Our agenda for today is pretty straightforward. We'll start with the anatomy of the elite, move into Forged in the Crucible, then tactics, terror, and tech, followed by Masters of the Battlefield, the price of obsolescence, and wrap it all up with the legacy of legends.
Section 1. Anatomy of the Elite. Let's look at how we categorize these warriors.
Okay, before we get into the blood and the mud of it all, we really need to understand how to categorize the immense scale of history's deadliest units. It's actually fascinating how neatly these vastly different warriors fit into a shared tactical matrix. I mean, think about it. Whether we're talking about Viking berserkers fighting 1,000 years ago or World War I Italian Arditi, they occupy the exact same role. They're shock infantry. Their whole purpose is to absolutely shatter enemy morale and break fortifications. Then you have the Polish Winged Hussars and the Egyptian Mamelukes. They're your heavy cavalry, basically the battlefield sledgehammer. And then modern US Delta Force? They actually share their operational DNA with the Mongol Keshik and the Byzantine Varangian Guard. They are your highly specialized elite protectors and precision operators. So whether they rode horses or parachuted out of planes, their core tactical purposes heavily mirror each other.
Section 2. Forged in the Crucible. Time to look at extreme selection.
So, here's the thing. You aren't just born an elite operator, right? You are built through extreme physical and psychological forging. The absolute crucial starting point is mindset. Look at this chilling motto from the Arditi, the elite shock troops of the Royal Italian Army back in World War I. Either we win or we all die. These guys were handpicked from the absolute bravest soldiers. We're talking men who painted skulls on their helmets, blackened their faces with grease, and were ordered to break through heavily fortified trenches using basically just daggers, grenades, and flamethrowers. This fatalistic, do-or-die psychology, that was an absolute prerequisite before they even stepped foot on the battlefield.
Now, if you contrast that sheer, raw, ancient aggression with the cold, mathematical brutality of modern selection, you get the Gurkhas. These are legendary soldiers from Nepal who've served for over 200 years, and their selection process is just staggering. 30,000 applicants compete every single year for roughly 200 slots. Just let that math sink in for a second. To even be considered, these recruits undergo brutal physical trials. I'm talking about running up steep Himalayan hills carrying heavy baskets filled with rocks. It is extreme selection designed to weed out everyone except the absolute most resilient.
And this brilliantly illustrates how the timeline of forging a warrior has shifted over the centuries, even if the sheer intensity hasn't. On the one hand, you have the ancient Spartan agago, which represents a lifelong forging process. At age 7, boys were taken from their homes to endure constant deprivation, pain, and full-time combat training that literally lasted into their 30s. But then, on the flip side, we have modern US Delta Force. Instead of a lifetime, it's this highly compressed, hyper-specialized crucible. Recruits face a brutal 4-week physical selection, which includes a 40-mile march over rough terrain lugging 45 pounds of gear. And that's immediately followed by a 6-month pipeline of counterterrorism, espionage, and explosives training.
But across all eras, raw endurance is the common denominator. Before they ever even swung a weapon, these units completely mastered physical torture. Shaka Zulu's Impi warriors, for instance, were forced to run 50 miles barefoot over thorn-filled terrain just to harden their feet. Imagine that. The Mongol Keshik, Genghis Khan's elite guard, literally learned to sleep in the saddle during forced marches. And the Roman legionaries, the guys who built an empire from Scotland all the way to Iraq, they carried up to 45 kilograms of equipment and were expected to construct a fully fortified walled camp every single night.
Section 3. Tactics, Terror, and Tech. Let's talk about how they fought and terrified their enemies.
Okay, so once all this grueling training was complete, how did these units actually fight? Well, take the Spanish tercios. They were the elite units of the Habsburg era, completely dominating Europe for over a century. They didn't just rely on one big weapon. They pioneered this incredible combined arms approach. It was basically a synchronized dance of destruction. First, heavily armored pikemen would hold a very rigid front line.
Second, mobile musketeers would shift out to the flanks to unleash these devastating volleys of fire. And finally, the swordsmen would rush in to violently exploit the gaps left in the broken enemy formations. This exact mechanical system crushed their enemies at historic battles like Pavia and Nordlingen.
But sometimes, honestly, sheer kinetic force was all the tactics you needed. The Mongol Kashik wielded composite bows with a massive draw weight of 160 pounds. Now, if you know anything about archery, you know that is an insane amount of tension. Imagine the terrifying kinetic energy of that weapon. When fired by highly trained archers during a full gallop cavalry charge, these arrows effortlessly pierced thick enemy armor, making the Kashik this unstoppable buzzsaw that helped Genghis Khan conquer the known world.
And of course, we can't talk about battlefield tactics without talking about pure, unadulterated terror, psychological warfare. Aztec jaguar warriors would wear these intimidating animal-themed suits of armor and wield wooden clubs edged with razor-sharp obsidian blades that were literally capable of decapitating a horse in a single strike. Then, half a world away, you've got Viking berserkers using self-induced trances and wildly hallucinogenic mushrooms to enter a state of absolute frenzy. We're talking guys fighting completely naked, biting their own shields, and screaming at the top of their lungs. They used visual shock and sheer insanity to shatter enemy morale before physical contact was even made.
Section 4. Masters of the Battlefield. The moments they defied the odds.
Let's look at a few specific moments where these units totally defied belief and completely dominated forces with far superior numbers. Frankly, these historical stats are just astounding. In 1940, a force of just 493 German Fallschirmjäger paratroopers assaulted the fortress of Eben Emael, capturing 1,200 Belgian defenders. Going back to ancient Greece, at the Battle of Thermopylae, a corps of 300 Spartan hoplites, alongside a few local allies, famously held off a Persian force of roughly 150,000 for 3 whole days. And then at the Battle of Gabine, the Macedonian Silver Shields, a unit of battle-hardened veterans who were literally in their 60s, butchered 5,000 enemy troops without suffering a single loss. 0 casualties. These stunning historical feats are exactly what forever cemented their elite status.
And we see this unbroken will to fight at both the macro and the micro level. Look at the Polish Winged Hussars at the Battle of Chodov. Just 100 of these heavy cavalrymen, with some light support, somehow held off a staggering 40,000 Tatar soldiers. It's almost unbelievable. But then, compare that mass cavalry stand to the individual defiance of a man named Lahiman Gurung during World War II. When his trench was attacked by 200 Japanese soldiers, this single Gurkha threw back enemy grenades until one exploded, blowing off most of his right hand. Undeterred, he just kept firing his rifle with his left hand, taking out 31 enemies and forcing a complete retreat. That right there is the raw, unpolished definition of an elite operator.
Section 5. The price of obsolescence. Everyone meets their match.
But here is the tragic reality of this explainer. No matter how elite a unit is, it eventually meets its match, and it's usually through a massive leap in technology or a brutal political betrayal. Let's trace the incredible 700-year reign of the samurai to see this in action. From their rise in the 1100s, to heroically repelling on Mongol invasions in the 13th century, to completely dominating massive battles like Sekigahara in 1600, they were the absolute peak of the warrior class. But look at how rapidly an elite culture falls. By 1877, during the Satsuma Rebellion, 40,000 samurai died. Why? Because a lifetime of mastering the traditional katana simply could not withstand a conscripted peasant army that was armed with modern rifles and Gatling guns.
Time and time again, history shows us technology brutally beating skill. The highly disciplined Zulu Impi, who had miraculously smashed the British army at Isandlwana, were violently retired when they eventually collided with superior British artillery at the Battle of Ulundi. The unstoppable, lightning-fast charges of the Swiss Reisleifer pikemen, ultimately broken by the advent of field artillery and early firearms. And thousands of years earlier, the elite Persian immortals quickly realized their vast numbers meant absolutely nothing when their wicker shields and scale armor were effortlessly pierced by solid Greek bronze.
Yet maybe the saddest end for an elite unit isn't on the battlefield against a foreign enemy at all. It's being purged from within. Both the Ottoman Janissaries and the Egyptian Mamluks were slave soldiers who spent centuries protecting their rulers, achieving immense political power and wealth in the process. But here is the bitter irony.
By the early 19th century, the very rulers they served realized these powerful, traditional units were standing squarely in the way of military modernization. So in 1811, the Mamluks were massacred at a citadel banquet, and in 1826, thousands of Janissaries were literally slaughtered in the streets by their own sultan's artillery. They were destroyed by the very states they built.
Section 6. The Legacy of Legends. How they shaped our modern map.
While these specific historical units might be long gone, the ghosts of these ancient warriors actually still shape our world today. Many of these groups experienced a sort of institutional rebirth. The Teutonic Knights, for example, were a medieval crusading order of warrior monks. They eventually secularized and evolved into the state of Prussia, which later became the highly disciplined military core of the entire German Empire. Similarly, those World War I Arditi we discussed earlier, they were disbanded after the war, but their specialized shock troop DNA mutated and survived. Today, they are widely considered the spiritual predecessors of Italy's highly respected modern Naval Special Operations Unit. And that lineage leads us straight to the present day, to what we can confidently consider the modern apex of the elite warrior, units like the U.S. Delta Force. They represent the absolute cutting edge of this long historical line, executing highly classified, extreme-risk global operations. Their resume spans all the way from the 1983 invasion of Grenada right up to a stunning raid in January 2026 that captured Venezuelan President Maduro. They carry that exact same torch of extreme specialization and physical endurance that the Mongol Keshik and the Spartans carried centuries before them.
But as we've learned from this explainer today, battlefield invincibility is profoundly fleeting. It never lasts. So I want to leave you with this provocative thought to take away. If the lifetime mastery of the samurai sword and the unbreakable shields of the Spartans were ultimately rendered entirely obsolete by leaps in technology, what technology is waiting in the wings right now that will eventually replace today's special forces? Will it be drone swarms, autonomous AI, or something we can't even fathom yet? History tells us that for sure, every elite unit eventually falls. The only real question is when.